Well, more like a geography, I think. That the words, like on a dictionary page, those words just by random happen to be collected there. But then that gives them a kind of a shape in and of themselves as related to them, related to one another. So it is, to my mind, like a geography, and sort of going through it, like walking through streets and things like that. So that's, I guess that's it. But you mean from how I put my words down on a page?
Yeah, I mean, I can see what you mean by the geography. I mean,
yeah.
Your work makes that quite explicit. Yes, so it's whether you're conscious of that was, that's an intention what you're doing.
Right, and hopefully leaving enough space so that other people would feel a geographic element to it as well. But then again, in this project that I've been working on lately, the illuminated apologies, that's a case where instead of the main text being illuminated by a drawing, it's illuminated by other text. So in a sense, I'm interested now in looking at how demarcations on the page can be used to challenge, like, the main text. The thing that seems to hold, well, no, I would put it more this way, that how do the words move, how would it move? And in terms, like with relational databases, that's, people they have the option of pulling things up from different areas. So I would want that to be an option in my work. The way that it moves, though, when I'm constructing it, would be a sense of self-critique or air tracking. I've used that expression before. So that for me, other people could read it and see it as a collision of different masses going on. But for me, it's the whole idea of, well, when you get to a certain point, where am I wrong here? Or where do things just fall flat into like one dimension? And then that's where I have to do something to change that, to make sure that it doesn't remain as one dimension. Like the thing I'm working on now, it's called Duty in 3Ds. And the first part of the project is one-dimensional duty, and I'm critiquing myself as being a very duty-driven person that's just a check mark kind of a thing. Like you have responsibilities and you get to check them off your list, and without paying heed to the consequences, and that kind of thing. So anyway, that's where the work is now in terms of multi-dimensionality. Oh yeah, I was actually going to read a little bit from Pie in the Sky tomorrow night, and thank Alan again for his work, because the idea of poetry, working in poetry as a project and as a research project, but from putting together all of these disparate things that you wouldn't think would ever go together. His place, that project really inspired me, and it's been such a gift, really. That idea of that's what poetry could be for someone who was writing, as a project. And then, so anyway, that's definitely true, and remains a real source of both comfort and inspiration. I am sort of, I think I'm an accidental language poet for that group, and partly because, Ron was very clear about this when he included my work in the American Tree. He said that, and this, I'm not criticizing him by saying this. He was being very honest. This was a good conversation. He was like, well, I personally don't like your work, but I want to have someone like you with my history in this anthology. So by that he meant someone who had been an activist in terms of the anti-war movement during the Vietnam era, and would be considered a feminist, even though I never really called myself that, but someone who took equal responsibility for, bringing money in and, combining poetry and raising a child and working and all of that sort of stuff. So, so basically, I'm one of those people that I was included because of who I am, which is kind of an interesting, as opposed to my work, which is kind of an interesting, for long-term, sort of long-term writing, an interesting position to be in, because I feel a great sense of freedom in to do the things that I come across or that I want to do. And I don't have to fit in. I don't have to fit in, to any sort of schema. And because actually I didn't fit in to begin with.
So what does it mean? You have to define what you're not fitting into. I mean, say if you could crystallise what language poetry is, what would you say it is? What would I say it would be? Well, at the beginning, I think it was. Looking at the combination of political and aesthetic concerns with the use of language. It was combining those two things. It was like looking at analyzing writing from the standpoint of, all right, politically, what does this do? Who does this support? Whose interests are validated by this kind of a narrative versus a concrete poem on the page or a sound poem. Does the sound poem continue to challenge a narrative, a traditional narrative, or is it? How soon is it appropriated and then goes to support things that one would not think could ever support it? So that, and one time Douglas Messerly and I had the publisher of Sun and Moon, had a conversation about this, because the DC buses, the buses in Washington DC, they had an advertisement on the side of the bus. It wasn't for poetry; it was for some kind of I'm not sure whether it was a video game system or what exactly it was, but it was language that was all broken up and sort of, in various directions, sort of, I guess, creating some kind of a BAM, and but it looked like a language poem, and it was selling something already. This was in the 80s, you know. So the question is really how soon is all of this sort of sucked into the general economy and used to promote the interests of those in power. And you know, I think we have to be honest about it. It happens pretty quickly. That's always so contentious, isn't it? Whether there is such a thing as the avant-garde, and especially if you want to challenge the idea of sort of a liberal kind of progress based in humanism. If you feel that that's problematic, it's really hard to say. On the other hand, that there is this avant-garde that's really changing things and leading other people on. You know, so I actually don't feel that way. I feel that that there's always sort of like these overlapping groups who have various concerns, and sometimes, you know, they come up with there's a real sense of how we can challenge what's going on in any given point in time, but that doesn't continue forward in a straight line at all. And also, I just feel like we have to be humble about all of this too. It's not anything that we can make any great claims for.
So I mean, you wouldn't see sort of, say, challenge as part of your work, part of your approach now? Challenge of, I suppose, societal structures.
Well, you know,
structures.
I mean, I do. I see it as part of that, but I wouldn't consider it. The kind of thing where there's a line and I'm leading it. Now, is this because I'm the oldest of 7 kids and I don't want to be in that position? I want to feel like there would be this various groups, this sort of a relational thing, if you will, of people working and maybe taking on, being more strident in different points in time, but not that thing where you have a leadership and a cadre. I don't want that kind of. I don't like to think of my writing that way. I don't like to think of my life that way. Well, Peter's really good about this because, early on he pointed out that if we lived in either New York or San Francisco, I'd be dead by now, because I would just not. I mean, the whole thing about Washington D.C. that's really a good thing for me is that it's a small enough group of people to pay attention to in the way that I like to pay attention to other people's work, and be involved in, when they would give readings or have exhibits or whatever. And if I had, like, for example, Facebook is a disaster for me because I feel like I have to respond to everybody who asks me to be a friend. I have to write them a thank you note. Thank you for befriending me, and I look them up and I am like so behind on that. It's like, because I take public transportation and I don't have wireless or anything, I don't have a laptop. I mean, I see people basically, they're twofers. They do public transportation with their laptops, and so they're doing Facebook while they're going to and from work. And that actually, I can see how that would make sense for people. But that's not my life at all. And so I'm really kind of, I'm kind of behind in all of that. And So anyway, so that just, every time this comes up where I get in and it says, you know, you have 32 friend requests, and I go, oh no, you know. I sort of think, well, this is what it'd be like if I lived in New York or San Francisco. Well, you know, what's interesting about that is that with striking resemblance, and of course that was still typewriter time for us. Yeah, and so I would just actually draw, I mean with pencil, but I would just draw in the dictionary and then transcribe it and then just draw the lines, you know. And so Rosemary Waldrop, when she and Keith eventually asked for the manuscript and said they wanted to publish it. So then she sent me a letter and she said, well, do you want these lines to be imperfect? You know, and because they were going to do, you know, they were going to do this, and I wrote back and I said, well, yeah, that's fine, because that was the way it was. It was, you know, I wasn't using a form, I wasn't using a mold or any kind of, you know, it was the whole idea that gives the sense of the process, you know, of doing it, and I thought that was just fine. So they did leave little gaps, and you know, they did ape it, you know, the way that I had sent it to them. And you know, the thing about you know, I think it's interesting jumping to current things, you know, when people do a lot of, when they can get a lot of different kinds of language used together pretty easily. That's the FLARF thing, as I understand it anyway. That they do some searches, they copy a lot of different language together from disparate sources, and that's the poem. You know, it's kind of a found poem, but a found poem that has like a, you know, a sort of a breadth and a broader scope than we're kind of used to. And that can be, you know, I mean, it can kind of fall flat and stuff, but sometimes they're really funny, or they're very interesting, and you know, and that kind of stuff. But then, you know, the flip side to it is, it's almost like you want, you know, you want you want that to be acknowledged in the poem itself as the whole idea of the process of it, or else it gets kind of boring. And one of the things that happened when I was doing something for one of the projects that I finished, the Opposable Thumbs project. So I had copied these different definitions out of you know, from online dictionaries, and I, you know, edited them a bit. But then what happened was they carried links with them when I copied them in, which I didn't realize. And now in the finished piece, there's one section where it just says word, but word isn't highlighted, but everything around it is highlighted, and there are all these different links. And I mean, I didn't do that consciously, but I just love having it that way. You know, that because it's almost like, well, the reader could then just go in all these different directions and look at these different, look at the definitions of these different words and how different they are, and all that sort of stuff. So. Well, it was a definite decision on my part not to do that. And when at one point I was encouraged to, you know, look at MFA things by friends, and they said, oh, you know, you would just love this. So I went up to Hopkins and I sat in on a class, and I mean, the people were really nice, but it was deadly, you know, and these were really interesting people, but the whole, and I just thought, oh, you know, so it was a choice not to do that. And the whole idea of continuing to write for all of your life, that you know, to have that also be connected to how you would bring money in was a really disturbing to me. you know, and so I am a librarian, and I didn't start out as an academic librarian. I do work at a university, a special collection at a university, but I thought I was going to be a public library librarian. But that was, I went to school in the early 80s, and that's when Reagan came in, and he just devastated the library funding. That was one of the things that he cut. And so that when I got out of library school, when I went in, I did it part-time, you know, at night over 3 years. And when I went in, there were public library jobs. And when I came out, there weren't, you know. So then I, you know, was doing things with, the only place that was really hiring librarians was the tech, you know, infotech at that time, because they could get us for really cheap. And a lot, you know, but there were jobs there, so that was a benefit. And but I never thought I would be an academic librarian. I didn't do that track, and it was just force of circumstance that I became an academic librarian. And so there's some interesting things to it, you know. So then there's a responsibility. So where the crossover is with my work now is there's this project where Poetics Journal is going to put their archives online. They're going to digitize their archives, or they've already digitized them, and they're getting ready for it to go up. And it's going to be a fee-based service. So as a librarian, we're all involved with this open access movement, both for journal publishing and for archives. So I declined to participate in that. And, you know, when asked why, very, very nicely, you know, and it wasn't a question of ethics, actually. You know, I mean, there's nothing ethically wrong with having a fee-based service, you know, from just, you know, from a basic, you know, perspective, because there are, as was pointed out to me, and it's very true, there are costs involved with creating and maintaining an archive. Who is going to bear those costs? And I said, well, the open access movement, in the open access movement, the authors bear the cost. The authors and the institutions. You know, the institutions pay some and the authors pay some. I mean, the institutions pay for the maintenance, I think, and the authors pay when their documents would be added. So, you know, so there's that crossover now. That actually, I'm really glad. I'm happy to be in that position. You know, because you know all of this information that's out there right now. You know, people have this this sort of many times the idea, it's not a romantic idea, but sort of almost a, what would you call it? Well, a habit. You know, they think that this is going to be free, you know, that all these things on the web are going to be free, as most things are being commercialized now. You know, it's more and more that there are fees associated with things. And so people are not sort of taking seriously if we're going to have a free web, an open access web, what does that mean? What's that going to take? And so this is great for me, you know, to be in the position, from an academic position that's not teaching, to be able to critique that. So that's what happened. You know, 20 years ago, I would never have thought that this would be what I'd be doing. But it's great for poetry. I mean, for my poetry. The thing that I know about myself is that I would be a terrible teacher. That's another aspect which I should be really honestly admit, is that I would be a terrible teacher. I'd be idiosyncratic. But at the same time, I would feel that the students would really need to have a comprehensive instruction, you know, from the professor. So I would have been always totally at war, you know, with who I am and with myself, and that wouldn't have been good for work, just generally. But we do know people who teach, who are excellent teachers, and it actually helps with the writing. You know, that those two things go hand in hand for them. So, yeah, I don't just from the standpoint of academic work as being necessarily, sort of, again, like a one-dimensional understanding of it, good or bad. I don't. I think it's much more complex than that, and that there are some people who can really be wonderful teachers and wonderful writers at the same time. The MFA programs that grew up, sort of began, I think, in the 70s, but really sort of the 80s and the 90s, were the feeder system for those programs were the talented and gifted programs that were devised in the school systems to avoid confrontations with busing. So in other words, you would send your child to a neighborhood that was economically depressed and primarily minority or children of color, because they were going to be in this special program because they were talented and gifted, and so they were benefiting from, quote unquote, benefiting from being bused, and that was to depoliticize the whole nature of that, which is questionable. I mean, that's one of the big problems that we have in the States is we don't have the ability to analyze problems that way. So here we have this whole academic system now that's based on not looking at the issues that went into creating this system of needing to bus children and also needing to obscure that